Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey there, this is Jim DuBos, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The Launch Capsule. Today, we're focusing on a very common attribute that I'm seeing in transactions that I've done many times in my own individual journey, and it's rollover equity. So let's define it. In a previous episode, I talked about a $10 million transaction. And in that episode, we said we're going to have a rollover equity amount of 15%. So $1.5 million of equity in NewCo. So there are things to contemplate here. Why would you consider rollover equity? Well, number one, it is an opportunity to receive more than the $1.5 million of cash at close because you think the company's got additional growth and revenue capacity and that you may get a higher multiple than what you're getting as an individual group. Because many times the business is being bought and bolted on to other companies, so you're part of a larger entity. And so because it's driving more revenue, more margin, it's higher value. So let's just say as an example, maybe you got a multiple of 7 times operating margin for your business and you now have sold and you're part of a bigger company. And because of the size of the operating margin, the size of the business, they're driving a 13 times multiple. Well, now your 1.5 million or 15% is going to be worth more just because of the size and scale of a future transaction. Buyers like it because it generates alignment. And it's very common if an entrepreneur is going to continue on in the business in some form or fashion, in driving the value into the company. The one thing to contemplate with rollover entities is you don't have control. So as an entrepreneur owner, you're able to control decisions that you think are going to drive the most beneficial financial outcomes for yourself and for the company. You're no longer in control. You may have a board seat, or you may be in an advisor position, or you may just be an employee who happens to have shares in NewCo. Well, the problem there is you don't have any control. And so at that point, you are dependent upon the new ownership, if you will, to drive the company to success. Now, there are some nuances that you can contemplate in the types of shares that you're going to receive in NewCo. Is it common stock? Is it preferred? Those types of things. How does cash waterfall through NewCo, and can you receive some ongoing benefit before another equity transaction occurs? So there's things to contemplate there. I think it's also timeline generated. All transactions, and I tell this to every entrepreneur that I work with, all transactions, money has a time-specific timeline. Could be 3 years, could be 5 years, maybe 7 years. Having knowledge of the buyer's timeline, let's call it the age of the money, having knowledge is very important because it's going to tell you how long am I in this 15% for? Am I going to see another payment in 3 years? Am I going to see a payment in 5 years, 7 years? So that starts to drive a little bit of your expectation around when would I see a result of the rollover equity. One thing that I've counseled people on is if you roll over, you need to try to negotiate what I like to call the exit button. Basically, where I'm going to just parachute out at a predetermined valuation method of that 15%. So as an example, that's worth $1.5 million. And so that $1.5 million is value is based upon certain characteristics. So let's just, for the sake of this discussion and the exit button I'm talking about, let's say it's 6 times The trailing 12 months EBITDA is the value of that they would apply if you push that exit button. Now, that's probably a discount. So if you said 6 times, they may be able to generate 10 times or 11 times. Well, but they're not going to pay you to exit the business early. You're going to hit a discount. But the reason that's important is because it does allow you the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Things have changed. I'm not going to continue to operate in the business. I think I want to just capitalize. I know I'm not going to get my full value based upon it, but I'm going to get something, so you're having this mentality more around similar to the earnout and the tiered approach to the earnout. You push a button and you get compensated. You're able to transact without any, I'll say, friction between the two, and so you might look and go, well, gosh, Jim, the exit button was 6 times. I got 8 times. I'm just using this as an example. 8 times my return, I actually lost money. Well, you did, but you didn't have 0. You got something of value for those shares. Okay. And so this gives you a sense of peace, I'll say, in order to think clearly in moving in, because you really don't know. You don't know. Things are going to happen that are unplanned. Buyer behavior might change based upon other things that you don't control. And this gives you an opportunity to monetize the rollover in a way where you receive something versus nothing. So that's a little bit of a perspective on contemplating rollover. Now, look, there's another component to this, particularly if you're working in the business and you're being paid a salary to execute, okay? So you're receiving value for your time if you have an ongoing employment relationship. But again, I think the biggest factor related to rollover that I like as a protection or a parachute is this buyout clause that gets carved in. Now, typically they're time limited. They might be 24 months, they might be 36 months. And so it's that duration of time based upon the time of money. I've also seen some reverse attributes get set. And so if the buyer initially says, look, we're going to do another transaction down the road in 3 years, that's our timeline on the money. And so what you do in that case is you say, okay, well, look, I'm going to stick with this for 3 years. But at 3 years, if you haven't generated a transaction, then that will be a trigger for me to receive X times on my 1.5. That's another way to contemplate this. So in a way, you're putting a wall up and saying, look, I believe you. I think you want to go execute a transaction. But if you don't, you just know, hey, you're going to buy me out at this predetermined value and we get on down the road. Another way to contemplate future value of that 15% that you rolled over. So I hope this was helpful to you. I'm going to continue giving you individual pieces of advice as you think about building your businesses and exiting your companies. Have an awesome day.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.